Flight attendant asks a dad to control his kids, and the dad vows to take his life. Just finally got to my destination after this one. I was flying from CLT to LAX. A man and a woman boarded with 4 children, aged roughly from 4 to 8. First, they didn't book seats together and made a huge stink to get people to switch seats with them to get the 6 to sit together. After an hour into the flight, 2 girls started skipping and running from the middle of the plane up to the cockpit and back repeatedly. They got bored of it and sat down eventually. Maybe 3 hours in, a boy started sprinting from one end of the plane to the other incessantly. Many passengers complained. A flight attendant got him to stop. That lasted 15 minutes, and off to the races he goes again. Someone else complains and he stops, briefly. Now a male flight attendant has had enough, escorts the boy back to his seat, and forcefully tells the parents to control the kids. This is where I took my headphones off due to the yelling. The father is livid at being told to control his kids. He's screaming about having 4 kids and only 2 adults. He's screaming about the flight attendant touching his kid. He threatened to sue multiple times. Finally, the attendant yells, "Put your frickin' mask on and sit the frick down." Then the dude loses his crap even more and yells back, "I have your information. I will find you and I will shoot you." That's the moment I knew my night was going to suck. It took a while, but eventually all of the attendants gathered and restrained the guy. A little while later, we were told by the pilot we had to turn to Albuquerque and land. We stayed on the plane and local police escorted the guy off, along with the rest of his family. As I was one of the few that wasn't wearing headphones, they got my info and then sent the FBI on and interviewed me. After that, we were told there was no fuel truck available to top us off, so they had to send one in. Then the maintenance guy that needed to sign off on the plane was at home and had to be called in as well. We eventually got going and made it to LAX about 2 hours late. Several around me on the flight, and myself included, were already late due to an issue with an earlier flight from CLT that had us rebooked to this one. I had to take an expensive Uber to Santa Ana, where my original flight was to anyway, and ended up at my hotel about 6 hours later than I was supposed to. So this whole debacle was just the icing on the cake. Also, please just stop writing in saying that passengers should sue the guy. The logistics of that just don't work out. First, it would cost me way too much time out of my life, which would end up meaning I'd spend more money than I lost in the first place, by an order of magnitude at the very least. Second, this guy is going to be bankrupt by the FAA and the airline. Even if I won a suit, I'd have a worthless judgment that would never be paid. It's a waste of time, and gosh darn, we are way too litigious in this country. Suck it up and move on, people. I do not know whether the dad was just generally this hands-off as a guardian or whether he had had a few days from hell to make him explode like this, but the fact that he defaulted to mask-off threats of violence during the height of the pandemic does mean that I'm more inclined to just think he was always a massive jerk. Having that number of kids might be a very stressful thing, but it doesn't give you an excuse to go off like this and actually commit an actual crime. I write this as one of 4 kids whose parental figures never threatened to kill the working professionals around us, miraculously. I will say that there was one pretty unique aspect of this story. We don't often get opinions from the authors themselves on the prospective fate of these monsters, and it sounds like the dad might have made being a parent of 4 kids a little bit more stressful than it ought to have been, at least in a financial sense. I do feel bad for the rest of the family, to be honest. It's not the little boy's fault he wasn't being kept busy by the parents, and they don't deserve to have the head of the family bankrupted. But yeah, it sounds like the rest of the flight shouldn't bother suing the idiot. He's going to be hung out to dry and unfortunately pay a vast majority of all he has in the ensuing lawsuits. Sucks to suck. I once quit so hard that my boss called the cops. I used to work at a cell phone carrier storefront. I'd been there for 5 years. Cell phone sales can be absolutely brutal. It wasn't uncommon to have a customer come in so mad that they'd immediately start cussing you over the service issues. I even had one throw a phone at me over the counter that I couldn't warranty out because of self-inflicted water damage. Nonetheless, I was a salesperson of the month multiple times and I always had good numbers. I had a boss who was brought in as the store manager as part of a college new hire program. Despite many in-store employees being way more qualified with life experience in cell phone sales for more than 15 years. Eventually, she ran off many of the veterans, and I was left to open the store one morning by myself, while the manager was on the floor greeting people. She was insufferable with all her micromanaging, and would always stand over my shoulder being critical of how long I'd take with each customer. She didn't have any work experience, so there's that too. She would never open her own register. Well, this time I had about a dozen different customers needing help, and they were all lined up waiting and angry. My boss comes over while I'm trying to go as fast as possible and says in my ear, "You're taking too long, you need to move faster." I explained that each customer has specific needs and I must make sure they're completely satisfied to avoid a bad review call and getting written up again. Mostly due to a new policy where she'd replay our call reviews and team meetings where we all got to listen to customers tell us how horrible we were and even insult our appearance. She wasn't taking a hint, so I turned around and asked her to come with me for a second to the back. She followed me and immediately said, "What's the deal?" I said, "I think I'm done here. I can't work like this." To which she said, "If you leave, you know you can't come back." To which I simply said, "What a poor choice of response." I took out my store keys and handed them to her, much to her surprise, and I walked out of the store. I turned around and leaned on the public rail and watched through the window as she tried to deal with all of the customers, and I smoked a cig. She then went into the back, pausing helping the other customers, and called the cops. She tried to tell them that I was loitering and wouldn't leave. She also told them I was harassing the business. The cops arrived and found out the truth and told her I did nothing wrong and I was allowed to be there on public property. As she rolled her eyes at the police, I reminded her that she's taking too long and the customers need her. I just watched for another 10 minutes and left. Frick that. I may be petty, maybe, but she could frick right the frick off. That day, I'd just had enough. I wouldn't be talked down to anymore. I may have left and lost my job, but I found my dignity. Everyone deserves to be treated fairly. We came for the quitting story and stayed for the vengeful cigarette smoking. What an awesome way to watch her struggle with the consequences of her actions. I'll never understand what makes certain managers feel entitled to criticize people for a job they're incapable of doing themselves without adequate foreknowledge. And it sounds like this woman was technically expected to be able to do that job, and had just preferred to not become proficient in it up until the point where our author quit. And I'm sure she regretted that for the next few hours. So we have someone whose only role in the company seems to be discouraging and sending away employees who are otherwise doing more or less a good job up until that point. This is why service jobs should promote from within and not from bogus qualifications or nepotism. Sure, you might get lucky with those and get a person with enough general intelligence to do well, or you might get an insecure busybody who crashes the business and doesn't have the technical knowledge necessary to step in and help customers themselves, like this woman. I'll admit that it's more common to see this kind of thing in office and corporate jobs than service ones, but hey, it's nice to be surprised from time to time. In a lot of ways, this is more the fault of the higher-ups than it was on her, but she didn't do the smart thing and listen and observe the workers and environment around her before throwing her weight around. Great example of what not to do in your new management job. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, linked below. Also, go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for refusing to punish or allow my wife to punish our son? This all started back in March. My son's best friend turned 13. In his family, 13th birthday is a huge deal. In addition to a massive party, which all 4 of us were invited to, his parents also took him to Disney World. They invited my son to attend as well. My wife was hesitant to consent to this. She said it was unfair to allow our son to go when our 9-year-old daughter can't, especially since she loves Disney and princesses. I said that our kids won't always have the exact same opportunities, and if we set a precedent here, we'll have to stick to it if and when our daughter gets a similar opportunity. So we'd just be punishing both our children needlessly. My wife reluctantly agreed that we should allow our son to go. I gave our son money to buy his sister souvenirs. He did, and his friend's parents even bought extra stuff for him to give to her. Still, when she saw him come back wearing a Star Wars shirt, with the Mickey hat and trading pin lanyard, she burst into tears. My wife later said we made a huge mistake and never should have let him go. I mistakenly thought all of that was behind us. Now, we're not well off financially, but my brother-in-law is, and he invited all of us to visit a beach house he'd rented for the summer send-off. My wife told me that she wants to have our son stay with my dad and just to take our daughter to even the score. I told my wife that isn't happening. We're their parents, we can't favor one child over the other. Not being invited to the birthday trip of a kid you barely know is in no way comparable to being left out of a family vacation, and I'm shocked she'd even suggest such a thing. I refuse to allow it, and now my wife is angry, but I don't care. I'm not punishing my son for being lucky. Am I the jerk? Yeah, this is a weird and harsh call from your wife. Maybe she's just trying to create an environment of fairness, but if you're the little boy, it doesn't look like anything other than you being punished for having a fun time that your parents agreed to in the first place. And I get that it's upsetting when your siblings get invited to do cool stuff and you don't, but honestly, the daughter needs to know that sometimes that just happens. As many of us were no doubt told by our parents growing up. And yes, as a kid, we can be selfish little gremlins who actively resent our brothers and sisters for having a good time that we don't get to go on. But then generally, you'll get invited to things that the others won't and things will even out. If you're a good friend, people might like you and invite you to things. You shouldn't be punished for that. My mother called me selfish for wanting to be an organ donor and cremated when I die. My mother said this years ago. My brother passed away suddenly from cancer in 2019, 27 hours after being diagnosed. He was 37. It tore our family apart from grief. It has caused us to make up our living wills and how we'd like to be buried. I was close to my brother, so he told me what he wanted if he died 4 years before he did. I planned his funeral and everything. My mother trusted me and was pleased with how I planned it. The day after his funeral, we were talking about how he wanted our bodies to be handled after death. I told her I wanted to donate my organs and whatever else is left. I wanted to be cremated and most of my ashes scattered. If my family want to keep some, they can. My mother asked how else she'll visit my grave. I told her I don't want a grave and again said that they can have some of my ashes and plan a funeral if they like. I don't care if I get a funeral or not, personally. Then she told me it's a sin not to have your body intact when going to heaven. When I reminded her I'm a non-believer, she started calling me selfish for putting a burden on her by making her think I'm going to hell for my body not being intact and an atheist. She started calling me selfish for not having a grave for her and her family to visit, and selfish for not letting family keep all of my ashes. When I told her my body, my choice, my mother started to cry and said, "Well, if you die before me, I'll make sure you have a grave. I don't care what you want. How could you be so self-absorbed?" I felt bad and apologized. She said, "Think about someone else for once. You know how selfish it is to want to pollute the environment with human remains?" Yeah, I know now that I said nothing wrong, but at the time I felt like a jerk for not letting my family visit my grave, so that's why I apologized. Since then, I wrote a living will because I can't trust my mother to handle my wishes. Recently, when the conversation steered to death and burial, I again repeated my wishes. My mother said, "No, you're not. I'm not going to live the rest of my life thinking my daughter is in hell. I'll plan everything for you." Okay, Mum. I like how planning to donate your organs and not saddle your family with too much funeral debt is considered selfish from their points of view. Ah yes, I forgot the biggest shame in the event of my early death would be other people's wishes not being respected. And what's with her claim that it was going to pollute the environment? I'm not 100% on the numbers, but surely cremation uses less space and material than a coffin and a grave plot? It sounds grim to say it, but maybe just appease her and hope that she carks it earlier than you do so that you're both happy? The whole heaven and hell worries do come from a place of love, even if they're kind of toxic and annoying, and I'd probably just hand-wave to the worried parties. I do understand if you don't want to peddle in deception, though. It might just be that I'm a less moral person. Am I the jerk for changing the door locks back after my wife changed them? I have a beautiful wife who loves to serve others. We bought a home down the street from my family. I have a teenage sister who likes to crash at our house with her friends. My wife is normally pretty easygoing until recently. My sister's friends have been leaving messes, mostly towels on the floor after using our pool. My wife got upset after picking them up every day. I've asked my sister to make sure the house is clean after they leave, and it has been better. My wife has also complained that some of her perfumes and clothes and personal items have gone missing. My sister said it's not her. I believe my sister, I just don't see her doing that. I told my wife and we agreed to just replace them. Last week, my wife made a couple of pans of cinnamon rolls from scratch. One pan was for us, the second pan was for a co-worker's family who's experiencing a tragedy. My wife went to the gym. I went to work, and my sister and her friends came by. The one pan wasn't enough for her and her friends, they wanted the second pan of cinnamon rolls, and my sister texted my wife asking if they could eat them. My wife said no. My sister and her friends ate them anyway. My wife was upset and went and bought new locks. When I came home, my wife handed me a new key and told me that she didn't want anyone else to have a key to our house. I tried to calm her down and tell her that I'd just go replace the eaten cinnamon rolls with store-bought ones. My wife decided this was her hill to die on and said no, my sister had lost the privilege to come when we're not home. Replacing stolen items wasn't good enough anymore. My mum called and asked if my sister could use the pool as a back-to-school party. I was under the impression my mum would be there. I said yes. My mum was at work and our schedules clashed. The easiest solution was for me to change the locks so they could come back to the house. My mum didn't come with my sister. When my wife got home after the party, the place was a mess. She sent me photos. She called me a jerk for changing the locks without talking to her about it. Keep in mind, she did that in the first place as well. Then she told me that I broke her trust. She wasn't safe in her home because she keeps getting robbed, and I refused to put an end to it. I did talk with my sister, by the way. Then my wife let me know she was staying with a friend for a while. Am I the jerk here? I feel like I've tried to right any wrongs that have happened between my wife and my sister. Okay, update. Sorry I haven't been able to reply for the past few hours, I've been really busy. I talked to my mum again and let her know my sister isn't allowed over without me home. I asked a friend's wife who's a maid to come and deep clean our home. So if or when my wife comes home, it's clean. The last thing is my mum had asked me to help cover my sister's cheerleading fees. She's on track for a scholarship. I told my mum I'd pay half if my wife's things were returned. If not, the money was going to replace the stolen items. Also, my sister was invited to homecoming. She wanted me to buy her a dress. I told her no for not following our home rules, and the money I saved for the dress is going to pay for the maid. I did replace the locks again. I'm also planning a romantic dinner I'll make and clean up after. I've heard a lot about cinnamon rolls. Someone on here gave me the idea to make them for dessert. For other updates, my sister and mum left a few minutes ago. My sister had a bag of my wife's things. More than I thought was gone. Most items are in poor shape. The big thing is she had my wife's grandmother's ring. I thought it was in the safe. I had no idea it was gone. My sister said she found it on my wife's nightstand during the party. She forgot she had it when she left our home. The ring isn't valuable, it's just sentimental. I told my mum who the ring belonged to and my mum lost it. My sister is now grounded. Okay, I've just been on the phone with my wife. She's coming home. I'm staying at a friend's house until we can work some of this out. I already stated it, but I did put the locks back on that my wife had bought. My family doesn't have that key. Penultimate update, my mum called my wife last night and asked what my sister can do to fix or replace the damaged items. My wife said, have her meet me every morning at 5 a.m. I decided to tag along and see what my wife had planned, trying to support her in whatever punishment she decides to do. You know the cinnamon rolls? My wife's co-worker's 4-year-old is in the final stages of terminal illness. My wife's plan is for my sister and her to prepare breakfast, get their other kids up and ready for the day, start laundry, basic cleanup, so that her co-worker and his wife can spend as much time as he can with the sick child before work. My sister was silent the whole time before coming back home. I can tell it really hit her that her life isn't that hard, even being grounded. Okay, last and final post. My wife has given me a second chance as long as I follow her list of rules. 1. For a while, no family allowed at our home. 2. No family borrowing our things. 3. No one is allowed a key. 4. I help with the chores around the house, including cooked meals. And 5th and final, my wife is okay with me seeing my sister, but asked that we all go to counseling to understand why my sister is targeting her. My wife said that all of this has been really hard and she doesn't want to cause more issues, but she just doesn't trust my sister and can't have her using our things. Okay, yeah, so I'll say that the author was definitely the jerk in the story, at least for a while. And his jerkiness seems to have come from just not being able to read the situation properly more than anything else. I thought maybe we were jumping to conclusions when it came to the sister stealing things, but I was definitively proven wrong. But even if the sister were innocent of that particular act, our author's main error was in failing to respect and follow his wife's stance on the locks or understanding why she was angry about the cinnamon buns. It sounds like you eventually put in the effort to show her that you'd support her in the future, so good on you. Let's call this a reformed jerk. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories. Or if you want to check out some great music, check out easymode.com. If you like Am I the Jerk, give Am I the Genius a shot. Everything linked in the description.